Hey guys.
Hey.
What's up?
So we're back. This is week 2, and we decided that we were going to shift things up a little bit. We felt like last week we kind of covered all of part 1, the prelude, prologue, and we felt like maybe we were pushing a little too hard on this. We wanted to kind of slow it down a little bit. So this week, instead of covering all of part 2, we're going to cover maybe the interludes in between, and then we're going to go up to chapter 18 or maybe chapter 19. We didn't really decide if we were going to include Dalinar's vision or not, but basically we're going to do half.
I went through 19 personally, and I'm going to bring up 19.
Okay.
I did as well.
So we're going to go through chapter 19, but basically moving forward, we're just going to do half of each part. So we'll go through a little bit slowly, and hopefully this way we will finish Oathbringer the week before Rhythm of War comes out. So we'll be able to dive right into that. So should be cool.
That's awesome.
Anyhow, if you weren't with us last week, I'm Sabariel. The person below me, at least on my screen, is Wendell.
Yeah, on my screen, you just pointed at my keyboard.
Same.
And then the guy with the map is Navani. And then the guy with the hat is Sa'anat. I think that's how you pronounce that. You can correct me.
I'm glad you,
good
because
job.
I had no idea how to pronounce my name.
It's probably Sa'anat, right? The J is probably a Y sound, maybe, because Sa'anat. Anyhow,
Yeah.
we're going to be talking about part 2, the first half of part 2. And let's see, John, what do you have for us today?
Yeah, so really fascinating conversation last time. This time I was kind of intrigued by the relationship between the male Kholin characters, so Dalinar, Elacor, Adolin, and Renarin. And it's really an interesting study in, I think, masculinity and, the relationship between, sons and fathers and the idea of legacy. So to this point in the book, we haven't got much backstory of Dalinar's life, but we know him as the Blackthorn. We know that he's kind of like this hero of heroes, warrior of warriors, and he's had somewhat of a we don't have all the pieces yet in terms of his change, but he's certainly maybe you could say he's aged, but he's not quite the man that he used to be. And his oldest son, Adolin, his whole life basically has been dedicated to living up to the legacy of his dad. And then of course you have Elacor, who's the king in place of Gavilar, who died, and he's trying to live up to the legacy of his father. And Dalinar is trying to support him, but at the same time is just patently better than him at just being a man and just in every way almost. And then you have Renarin, who's like kind of the runt of the litter sort of thing, at least at this point of the book, and is also trying to make his way in this very Alethi world where, to be a man is to be a warrior, to be powerful in the battlefield. And he has these, these seizures, which means that he's not even been able to train with a sword and things of that nature. So for me, the one place where this all is kind of like, I think Sanderson plays with these ideas together is in the hunt for the Kazon Fiend. So, Elacor kind of goes off kind of in kind of like a spontaneous way, probably in his mind imitating what he imagined it was like when his dad and his uncle were fighting for their kingdom, and he gets himself in trouble. And then so, Dalinar and Adolin kind of rush to his aid. Dalinar is kind of, at least the way that I read it, he's helping, but like he's very cognitive in the beginning. Like he's thinking about, what about this? Can I make sure about this? He's like commanding the soldiers at the same time. Adolin is like charging in on his horse. And then as things start to unravel, as Elacor gets knocked off his strap breaks or whatever, and he falls off his horse and he becomes in danger. Suddenly, Dalinar kind of turns into the Blackthorn, and everyone kind of sees who he is. And there's this really interesting moment where Renarin sees his dad kind of get knocked off his horse, and he like wants to run into the battle, and his dad's response to him is literally, "Go away, fool boy! Like what are you doing here? This is not your place. You don't have shard plate. You're not a warrior. Kind of get to the side. Let the real men handle it." And in the end, basically Dalinar saves the day by catching a Kazon Fiend's claw, while all of those other three males, so Adolin, Elhokar, and Renarin, are in some way impotent in that moment. And Sadeas is kind of in the back, safe with the arrows, but like not really involved. I just thought it was very interesting. It made me think about my own upbringing, my own relationship with my dad, and trying to figure out what it is to be a man and trying to live up to those pictures of masculinity, while at the same time trying to figure out your own identity. And so yeah, I just wanted to sort of toss that out to you guys. Have you thought much about that, or does it echo with any of your own stories of like becoming, living in the shadow of a male figure, uncle, father, whoever? Yeah.
I was going to jump in here, but my son is actually printing something in the room, so I thought it would be kind of loud. I was going to see if one of the other guys was going to jump on it. But I'm already doing it, so why not? Let's go for it. The big thing that I noticed or felt going through this part of the story this time that I hadn't really given too much attention to is really connected to that. And it was the idea of, it seemed like every story and every chapter that we read this time was in some way about some character dealing with expectations, like the expectations that others put on them, or that they put on themselves, and not being met. Like you have Dalinar wrestling with the fact that everyone wants him to be the Blackthorn, but yet he feels like he's being led into a different kind of leadership. And you have Adolin, who's got like these expectations that he's kind of supposed to not duel, like whatever it is that Adolin is supposed to be. Instead, like his father's like, "I'm going to make a private investigator out of you," and that's not the first time that's good, or the only time that's going to happen to Adolin, by the way. And it's not his strong suit. Like it's not obviously who Adolin was meant to be. Mm-hmm. And then you have Renarin, obviously, in this story, who's got these expectations of what he's supposed to be, and he's wrestling with those. Everything with Kaladin is about the expectations in the present tense story, like the expectations that everyone else has on just let us be bridgemen, let us die, let us have our peace, let's not, try to take this too seriously. But the flashback story especially is him dealing with the expectations of the girl, like wanting him to become a soldier and win a shard blade, and his father wanting him to become a surgeon. And like I felt like I couldn't get into any part of this story without being confronted with this idea somewhere of people wrestling with feeling like, or like they should be something different than what everyone else perceives them as.
Yeah. I like that.
Well, so I wanted to ask you guys, like, I don't know how clearly we need to say this, but spoilers. So the thrill.
We hadn't, just hold on a second. We hadn't said that in this video yet. And we probably should vocalize that in every video that we should do, that we are going to possibly dip full spoiler into anything Brandon Sanderson has ever written or said.
So spoilers for, Oathbringer, especially here. So I feel like the thrill has like this very interesting, like you're talking about masculinity and sort of these different expressions. And the thrill is sort of like an undercurrent a little bit.
Yeah.
Like I can't remember if we have yet through chapter 19 had a chapter about Adolin kind of thinking about it. But Dalinar, I believe, has some kind of thoughts about it. we find out later that that's actually one of the unmade sort of like influencing people. And so that like, I find that kind of an interesting idea, that like even a concept of masculinity, which is obviously like pretty potent in their relationships, we find out is sort of being undermined to a degree by this malicious force, and clearly has a massive sort of like impact on Dalinar's history, and the way then that Elhokar, Renarin, and Adolin view him as like this central figure in their lives. And so like I'm not even really sure how to like wrap my mind around how to think about that. Like there definitely is some current tie-ins with, you know, masculinity and phrases like toxic masculinity and such, that I don't know, just
yeah. I think it's interesting that, you know, the ideas that Sanderson is playing here with here, like as you were saying, Brad, you know, if this picture, this especially Alethi picture of masculinity, has been influenced over maybe centuries, you know, by this unmade, by this, you know, spren basically that is driving it, then how do we know how to, you know, define ourselves, you know, or the characters in the book define themselves as men? What then makes them men? Mm-hmm. If the thing that they thought it was is actually not really coming fully from them. And, you know, you think about that in our culture today, you know, especially as things have changed, there are a lot of people who are trying to make sense of what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be, you know, a working class person, or an African American man, or a, you know, whatever that might be, even a Christian man, you know, to put that spin on it, when all of the kind of the traditional things are shifting, and we're now thinking, well, maybe those things were, you know, good, but where did they come from? Did they come from something actually solid, or was it just something that kind of came up out of our culture, which is not necessarily good or bad, but we've built like these ideals around them? So again, spoiler alert, in the book, you know, later we discover that Renarin is not just this kind of, you know, weak, you know, loser of a guy. He actually has this really amazing power, but because it is not manifesting itself in a traditional way, he wrestles with how to kind of, you know, fully embrace that. So anyway, that's
this really amazing dark cultic power. Just put that in there.
What I thought was interesting, and again, this is a spoiler, but I don't know, I can't remember when exactly this is revealed. I think it's in one of Dalinar's visions, but you know, we learned that there was a time when only honorable people had shard plate and shard blades, you know, and we learned that like that there was a character transformation that took place before they were able to wield these things, you know, like even the new Knights Radiance, you know, we're seeing that their development is very slow. You know, none of them have earned shard plate yet, you know, and some of them are just barely earning their, you know, their sword, their blade. And it's like all of that changed, you know, in order to have that kind of power, you had to be an honorable person. But then after the Recreants, like all these people just ran out onto the field and, you know, grabbed swords. And it was like, you didn't have to earn this power anymore. You know, you could be, and it seems like that just shifted the culture in just like earth-shattering ways, you know, because like all of a sudden honor really had no place anymore. In fact, after the Recreants, in order to get ahead, you had to be dishonorable, basically, you know. And so that seems to have shaped like what it means to be a man, in at least in Alethkar, but maybe even Oliver Oshar, is that like if you want power, you got to fight it, even if it means stealing for it, you know?
Well, and I think it might not be until Words of Radiance, but at one point Adolin says that he recognizes the thrill in Eshonai. But
yeah,
it's kind of, definitely kind of an interesting like look at the influence that outside forces can have on how we understand our own identity.
mm-hmm.
It's a really
I made it. Yeah. I made a note on this, like not this time, not even the last time. It was like when we did our like unaired prologue prelude, you know, one of those attempts that we did a few weeks ago. One of the things that I noted in my book was it just struck me how there's the first story that says it took, it just has the first story, the prelude to the Stormlight Archive. And then as you go into the prologue, it says 4,500 years later. And then as you go into the next story about Sen and Dalit, it says 8 years later. And then as you go into finally the story, we're going to kind of stay in one place. It says, what is it, 7 months later? Or what? I can't remember exactly what it is, but 8 months later. And it just struck me how everybody's story, like here Brandon Sanderson is crafting, at this point he is setting up Kaladin's story. And everybody's story is impacted by things that happened thousands of years ago, things that happened more recently, things that happened more recent than that. And you know what I mean? Like there's these levels and layers to what has gone in to contribute, you know, at these different times. Yeah, this would be probably a good time to transition into the next topic. So I can't go because I'm sitting on something that's gonna.
So let me just jump in. Let me just jump in here. So I have just like maybe it's a trivia, maybe it's a little bit of an investigation for us, and we'll see how much time that takes before we get into a bigger question if we need to. So in the prelude chapter about Ishik, the fisherman, he meets 3 people on the Pure Lake that he kind of gives names to. And I'm wondering if we can sort of like review who they are or who maybe they might be. So here
it was actually, I was just gonna say, it was because of that chapter that I probably did my I probably spent more time in the copper mine this week than I did actually in the novel. And so it started there. Like that's where I started my dive into the copper mine.
Maybe I shouldn't bring this up then?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, like, that was a curiosity to me, and I had to go looking there too, and that's started kind of a deep dive down some rabbit holes for me.
So Ishik, this fisher in the Pure Lake, he meets with these 3 individuals. This is what it says on page 169 of The Way of Kings. There were 3 of them. 2 were dark-skinned Makabaki, though they were the strangest Makabaki he'd ever seen, which is kind of an interesting like note to hold on to. One was thick-limbed, where most of his kind were small and fine-boned. He had a completely bald head. The other was taller, with short dark hair, lean muscles, broad shoulders. In his head, Ishik called them Grump and Blunt on account of their personalities. The third man had light tan skin like an Alethi. He didn't seem quite right either, though. The eyes were the wrong shape, and his accent was certainly not Alethi. He spoke the Salay language worse than the other 2, and usually stayed quiet. He seemed thoughtful, though. Ishik called him Thinker. So who are Grump, Blunt, and Thinker? Blunt maybe is the most obvious. I'm not sure.
Those, though, I don't know, like, I don't want to make it not fun and exploratory, but those are pretty clearly defined, like, by now, like the fandom knows from a combination of the clues and words of Brandon and whatnot, like who all 3 of those characters are. So I mean, I can say who they are, but were you wanting to have more of a?
No, I was hoping for a shorter, just explanation of here we get introduced to these sort of 3 mysterious characters. We know more about them now. So who are they?
Yeah. Yeah. Did any of you guys know who they were without looking them up, or have any ideas, like anything that came to mind?
No.
I knew that Blunt was Nail.
Nope.
Yeah, I kind of figured one was Nail and one was Kalek, but
Nope, neither. None of them are heralds. They're all world hoppers from outside.
Oh.
I'm gonna have to disagree with you on that one.
Oh, see, more
kidding.
interesting than you thought, Rob.
No, they've all been pretty solidly identified. The Grump, the first one mentioned, is actually Galadon from Elantris. And at the end of the chapter, he uses a phrase, like a word in his original language. It's actually the word Kayana at the end in page 171. That is something that he uses in the Elantrian novel, as well as some other mannerisms and stuff that he gives. So I don't know if any of you have read Elantris or remember that one, but Galadon's the character that kind of helps the main character in his time in Elantris.
Yeah.
I actually haven't read or gone through the White Sands, and I know that you have, I think, Luke. But Blunt is I don't know how to say his name, but it's Baon, or Baon, is a character from Darkside. Who Darkside is apparently a story, and again, I haven't been in this, so I'm just revealing my ignorance on this one. But apparently, he's connected with Chris, the main world hopping scholar in that graphic novel, and becomes part of the 17th Shard group that these three are members of here. And then this one, I don't know how they got to this one. I didn't connect or find that out, but apparently Thinker is a character from the Mistborn trilogy called Demu, who works with Kelsier and after as well. He's in, all right, I know he's in at least the first two novels. So yeah, those are, at least Coppermind had those pretty well laid out and referenced and everything for who the characters were. Now, why they are there or why they are after
Herald.
Hoyd.
Are they after Hoyd or a
no.
Herald?
Yeah, they're after Hoyd. Yeah, that's another question.
Yeah, Whit makes a reference to it in one of the whatever you call those prefaces or.
All right. So that was just trivia that I don't know about you, but I especially trying to take myself back to before I had read more of the series. That's the first prelude that Sanderson drops in this book, or the interlude, I should say, that Sanderson drops in the book, and it's very mysterious. And so I wanted to spend a minute kind of appreciating the seeds that Sanderson is kind of planting. That gives some sense of expansiveness to what's going on in this story. So big question that I kind of wanted to explore with you was a little bit more thematic, and that is, we end our reading for this week with Dalinar going into vision, and we kind of get Dalinar being really kind of set up as, in some ways, like the archetypal either sort of prophet leader or visionary leader of a movement, which is both sort of a trope in fantasy, as well as a pretty common theme in biblical narratives. If you look at Moses or Jesus, and even historical narratives. I mean, you could probably throw Martin Luther and Martin Luther King Jr. I have a dream into that same sort of visionary, prophetic leader category. And I kind of was curious what you guys thought about both Dalinar's sort of introduction in that sort of archetype, where in some ways it's very trope-ish, and in other ways it's kind of undermining the trope, certainly as we find out more about these visions later on. And also sort of what you thought just in general about the idea of a visionary leader, a prophetic leader.
This is a really cool idea, Brad, that you brought out. And I think the thing that I find interesting about it is that through the journey of Dalinar, you get to see what it's like for the visionary leader before they become the awesome leader that everyone recognizes as, oh, this amazing leader with their visions. At first, they just seem crazy, and they themselves doubt their own like visions. And obviously, you know, in the world that's more metaphorical than literal in terms of the sense of vision, and it's leading him totally against his culture, totally against even the things that he has espoused and done in the past. And he's having to wrestle with, you know, do I trust the visions? Can I go forward? Will I be able to bring everyone with me as I'm making this kind of radical left turn? And the people that you made, whether it be Moses, you know, Jesus, you know, Martin Luther King Jr., all were doing that in a sense in their time, taking a big leap into the unknown. And from our vantage point, we can look back and say, wow, what great leaders. But at the time, and probably privately, they were filled with a lot of doubt. So it makes me think, how many other people are sitting on vision that maybe could really transform, maybe not the world, maybe just your own life, maybe just your own family, but for fear of looking crazy and because you doubt yourself, you're like, maybe I just don't act on it, or I don't tell anyone about it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
or even just the fear of all the battle that you're going to have to face, like all the resistance, all of the people don't like change, and so, you know, yeah, even in the smallest of contexts that is my own life, I have found that years ago I found it easier to be a visionary, a hopeful visionary. And then over time, it's just gotten more and more for me to a place where I kind of just don't even want the hassle and the fight of having to move forward. When there's always resistance for things that, from my point of view, are just not worth it, you know? But yet you look at Dalinar's case, and he had a vision that was compelling him, and his entire culture around him was not only resistant to it, but was viewing him as almost under the influence of the enemy, you know, for the vision that he had. And it was strong enough and real enough stakes that he keeps pressing, keeps going forward, and yet handles all of that with a grace and a graciousness to others. You know, like the scene that we had in this reading where Adolin confronts him and just kind of goes off on him. And he responds back to Adolin like with a lot of humility and grace. And then there's the other scene where Elhokar makes the biting comment back to him when he's like, you know, let me protect you. And Elhokar's like, yeah, like you protected my father. And Dalinar responds back to that with, again, being like, wow, that's one of the truest things you've ever said to me. You're right. Maybe you shouldn't put your faith in me. And I don't know, like I used to read this book and feel like I was really inspired by Dalinar, and I was like, this guy gets me, like we're on the same page. And now, like in this read through, I'm just like, I'm such a coward compared to Dalinar. Like I have nothing. The small little things that I think are battles in my life, and I'm not willing to stand up and fight for them. This guy's got way huger forces and pressures being put on him. And he's just a character in a novel, I guess. So he has that advantage. But still, like it's been confronting me on my cowardice for being a visionary who doesn't act.
Yeah, it kind of makes me wonder, you know, what is the characteristic that, you know, as you were saying, Jonathan, you know, you were wondering, you know, how many people have the same sort of vision or visionary possibility, and yet are holding themselves back. And it makes me wonder what you think is the characteristic that potentially makes the difference between going forward with it or playing it safer.
I think ironically, and we talked a little bit about this last time, the idea of brokenness. All of the main characters have this. I think ironically, in the area of his visions, he's being the blackthorn. He's being that belligerent, won't go back, push through whatever obstacles. He's much more gracious now, like you said, Rob. He's much more kind of well-rounded as a person. But that steeliness within him is what's driving him forward. That kind of just being convinced that, of the righteousness of his cause, or I'm not saying not quite the righteousness of his cause, but just that he is not going to give up. And so it's kind of strange that what was a negative, or we will later discover, this will turn out to be a negative on the battlefield, actually really works in his favor with this. So I don't know. I think it challenges, and I don't know if this is, if Sanderson is intentionally doing that, or this is just my reflection, but it challenges the notion of you need to be like a perfect person to be a visionary leader. And all of the people that you mentioned, Brad, Moses, obviously Jesus, but both Martin Luther's, at least from our vantage point in history, we kind of paint them as these perfect people that always made the right choice, always said the right thing. But maybe the reality is that there is a process, and wherever maybe it starts with whether it's a sense of cowardness or fear or doubt or whatever it might be, or too much aggression, as in the case of Dalinar. But we can grow from that towards the leader that ultimately can make a difference in our.
Yeah, we can also be hypocrites who are people in the process of change. Yeah.
Well, I want to pass.
Oh,
sorry. I was going to pass the honor blade to Sabariel.
That's dangerous.
All right, I'll do my best. I think he's done. Yeah. Okay. So this is what kind of piqued my interest. This is not nearly as profound as what you guys have brought up already, but there's this thing that Syl says to Kaladin, where Kaladin says to Syl, first of all, he says, and I don't have references, sorry, but he says, I hadn't expected there to be so much discord among the camps here. I thought it would all be one king's army unified. And I think that this is kind of just a theme that Brandon is using throughout these books, the idea of there needing to be some sort of unification. But he notices that there's discord. And then what I find fascinating is that Syl just kind of says people are discord, referring to the humans, right? The humans that have come to Roshar. And then Kaladin says, what does that mean? And she says, you all act differently and think differently. Nothing else is like that, apparently on Roshar at least. Animals act alike, and all Spren are, in a sense, virtually the same individual. There's harmony in that, but not in you. It seems that no two of you can agree on anything. All the world does as it is supposed to, except for humans. Maybe that's why you so often want to kill each other. So there were a couple things that I wanted to kind of tease out of this. Like one is this idea that first of all, she says that Spren are, in a sense, virtually the same individual. And we kind of find out later that that the Almighty Honor has, that he was, I guess the host that you would call him was killed by Odium, but then the shard itself was not just left whole. The shard itself was actually splintered, and apparently not all of the spren, but some of the spren are those splinters of odium. Like, I guess, or not odium, but honor. Like, I guess Stormfather is a sliver because he's a larger splinter, but anyways, it makes me wonder, though, if a splintered shard can be repaired, if it can be put back together. That's why I had my, not that anybody watching this knows this, but like when I came into the chat, my name was Gibbeltish, because like there's a chapter later on in Way of Kings where Wit is having a conversation with Dalinar. And Wit is specifically talking about Adonasium. The first time the name Adonasium is mentioned is in that chapter later on. And he says, what would happen if you took a person, an individual, and you tore them apart, And he specifically says emotion by emotion, which I thought was interesting. But like, you tear them apart emotion by emotion. What would happen if you put them back together again? Would it be the same person, or would it be something altogether different? So I just wonder then if, Dalinar hears, he hears this phrase in his visions, unite them. And Dalinar's been trying to figure out what that means. Like right now in the story, he thinks it means unite the kingdom of Alethkar. But then later he's going to think that it means unite all of the nations of Roshar. And then there's a point where he like unites the different realms. But what is this phrase unite them referring to? Could it be that Honor is hoping that a bondsmith will be able to reunite the splinters of his broken shard? And what would that look like? What would happen in that case? So anyways, that's what I wanted to bring up to you guys and see what your thoughts were on that.
That's really fascinating, Sabariel.
That was nice and shallow.
Thanks. Well, I mean, yeah.
That was awesome, dude.
Thank you for that break from thinking. That was welcome.
Yeah. No, the things that you guys brought up were more honorable, and mine is just more nerdy, I guess, is what I was.
Yeah, but you have no idea how much what you brought up is going to tie into what I'm bringing in. So if you went nerd, I'm about to go super nerd on you guys when it's my turn. So
yeah, I mean, yeah. I do think I feel like that theme of humanity in this case, like healing wounds, both from like the recreants as well as odium, feels like a theme that's building. Like that feels like something that we're beginning to see foreshadowed in Adolin's character. It seems like that sort of like the relationship between Kaladin and Syl is, we saw that having an impact on the Honor Spren. So I don't know. It seems like that is deeply being foreshadowed. And will it go to the max of how does that contribute to what Hoyd is maybe potentially trying to accomplish with putting the shards back together? Which I don't know that is canon, but it's at least fanon to a degree.
Yeah. I read something about that somewhere, but I'll get into that later after all the bombs are dropped. But I thought something was interesting about that. Yeah.
That's a fascinating idea that you shared. And one of the things that I've been, and this is kind of related to what you said, but maybe you have some insight that I've missed. That idea that Honor was splintered and the Spren are, well, some of the Spren are basically slithers of him. It feels like there's not enough pieces to add up to what Honor was. especially what you said about the Stormfather being like a slither because he's a bigger piece, and then later, again, spoiler alert, what we discover in Oathbringer about how inferior Stormfather is compared to Odium. So in my mind, it's like, you know, the math doesn't add up. There's something missing, and I don't know if that's just because we're to assume that they're just, you know, billions of spren on Roshar, so you add them all together, and you know, it just the lump sum is that, or there's going to be some other reveals that, you know, will come later in the series. But it does seem that there is a big chunk missing of that original power, and if that can be united, then that would be definitely a game changer in everything.
Well, so I mean, and maybe this is just an overly simple look at it, but I mean, aren't all the shards what they are when they are joined with a person, within a person? I mean, that's Odium is sort of, that shard is within race. Like it seems like a shard being contained requires a person to a degree, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't know that that's been totally fleshed out, but yeah, it seems like, well, I don't know, because and again, spoiler, getting into like Elantris. So on Elantris, that the shard holder has been killed by Odium, and the shard, I think, also has been splintered, and it's the splintering of that shard that created Aeon Door, right? So like the power of the shard can
which was actually done, which was done by Odium too.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah.
Go on, yeah.
So it's like the power of the shard can exist without a shard holder. But yeah, I don't know that that's been totally fleshed out by Sanderson and the Cosmere yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, what else is interesting to me is that, and this is a spoiler for Oathbringer, but when Jezrien is killed, the other heralds feel it. They're almost like physically affected by it, which makes me wonder if somehow there's a part of honor living in each of them, you know, as well. Again, it's that idea of like the community existing as an individual, you know.
So, well, are we clear on that timeline of, like, you know, 40 in the prologue, or the prelude, when the 9 heralds throw down their honor blades, like, is honor still a thing? Is that pre being destroyed by Odium?
Yeah. This is something that I researched too, and like, so the Oath Pact was broken was abandoned by the 9. Taln is still keeping the Oath Pact, so the Oath Pact actually still exists through Taln. But that happened 4,500 years ago. The Recreants was a totally different event that happened only 2,000 years ago. And then from what I read, Honor died sometime after the Recreants. Or he was already diminishing in power by the time the Recreants came along, but he wasn't fully obliterated, killed, or whatever until after the Recreants. So Honor has only been dead for like at most a couple thousand years. But anyway, we should probably, I'm just looking at the time, we should probably let Navani
thank you,
drop her bomb.
You may refer to me as Brightness.
Okay.
That will suffice.
Yes, Brightness. I'm sorry.
I'm nervous now because it's like either I have a bomb to drop, or I'm going to show how absolutely ignorant I am of all of this stuff and have it be proven really quickly by you guys or commenters. So I had like, there was a trail, there was a specific line of questions that got me to, I guess, where this theory in my mind came together of what's going on, really what Wit is up to, which is really what this is about. And the first question I had was in reading that first chapter in part 2 with the Kazon Fiend coming kind of out of nowhere and attacking them. The question that, as I went through the story and then into the next chapter, that just kind of popped up on my mind was, where was Wit during all of that? Because Wit is with them writing to the Kazon Fiend. Like, you see him interacting with Renarin and kind of making fun of him. And then afterwards, there's even a moment when Dalinar, when he sees Wit, he's like, hey, where have you been? And all Wit says is like, I've got my own business I'm up to. And then he just makes jokes and goes on. But it's like Wit is introduced in this first story and then conveniently is gone for that whole part with the Kazon Fiend, even though we know he's out there on the plateaus with them. And so that was just the question I had in my mind, was like, what was he doing? The theory that came to my mind was remembering the conversation that he had with Dalinar that I know has already been referenced. It happens later on, but there's the conversation about the Gibbletish. Is that how you said it? Right, Luke? Yeah. In that conversation, he tells Dalinar, basically, you shouldn't trust me because my purpose and your purpose might not match up, and I would see this world like burn to the ground in order to get what I need to happen. Which is kind of out of nowhere. I've always felt uncomfortable with it because I view Wit as a hero. Like, I like Hoyd. And so, and knowing that he's a central, if not the central character in the Cosmere, I'm always like, I don't like that so much. Like, it always made me uncomfortable. But putting those together, I started like wondering like what he was doing. And then also recognizing, like, as I was just looking at the story as a whole, recognizing that event, it almost feels when you read it like it's just introducing you to Dalinar and Adolin and Sadeas and like, and you know, Renarin and like, but that Elhokar, like that's the point of that hunt gone wrong. But it is a very crucial moment to happen at the beginning there that actually is the first domino that falls that starts leading to a bunch of other dominoes falling down. Like, if it weren't for that, then there wouldn't have been the investigation into the cut strap, and there wouldn't have been the suggestion of becoming the High Prince of War, which there wouldn't have been a High Prince of Information, there wouldn't have been a coalition, there wouldn't have been a betrayal, there wouldn't have been the rescue, like all of it, like the whole plot of book 1 begins with this moment right there. So this is theory number 1. This is actually the first theory, which is limited to this book. And then I have a Cosmere size theory on Wit. But my first theory was that essentially Wit is the one who is responsible for the Kazon Fiend attack. That he made it happen that way because it was the first domino that needed to fall. And even though when he shows up in places, he doesn't necessarily know what to do ahead of time or why he was sent to a certain place in time or why he went there, but he always figures it out when he's there. That's the first domino that starts to fall. He needed that to happen. And it's interesting that it was to Elhokar. And we know that by the end of Oathbringer, that Wit has a very unique connection with Elhokar's uncompletely bonded Spren, right? That Wit is going to bond Elhokar's lost cryptic Spren, and that Wit is listed as one of the known Lightweavers on the Coppermine. I went through and looked at every order, and like he's listed as a Lightweaver. So my theory was that he caused the attack, and he has essentially been orchestrating the events by pushing every character in the direction he wants to push them. The question is why? And before I let you guys rebuff me or get to these, I'll just finish this Cosmere size theory. Like, why is he doing that? And the answer seems to be, well, because he's trying to gain the investiture of each of these systems, like each one of these shards. Like, he's, you know, at the end of Warbreaker, he's seen, you know, gathering breaths, and he's putting together like all of these things so that he has all the abilities. Yeah, even within in the Way of Kings, in the conversation that he's having with Frost, which is the intro conversation for a lot of the chapters we just read, you can see that he's not really worried about like even the 17th shard guys finding him those Blunt and Thinker and Grump. He's like, he even tells them, like, I don't even know if they'd know what to do with me if they found me. Like, he's apparently powerful enough even by that time. He's not really worried about them. So he, like Taravangian in a way, is trying to get these events to happen strictly for the purpose of waking everybody up so that the Rosharian investiture can become alive enough for him to be able to bond with the cryptic Spren who got left behind so that he could have light weaving, which is pretty sadistic, but also like is pretty brilliant. Like that this is the purpose that he's on, is trying to get all these things. So this is now my big theory. And I'm sorry to make this so long and drawn out just to get to this one point. But I was actually just starting to go through Arcanum Unbounded, or is it Unbound? I can't remember if it has an ED on the end. The collection of short stories. I was just starting to go through that with my son. And I noticed that in Brandon's preface to that book, he talks about how he talks about the Cosmere, and he talks about how each one of these books is supposed to stand on their own, and he wants readers to be able to appreciate them on their own. But he was always in love with this idea of a uniting story behind all of it that you could really get into if you wanted to go to that deep level. Mm-hmm. And he talks about how the Arcanum is his, like, this is a window into this. Like, all of these stories exist to try to give you a perspective into the behind the scenes of what's going on. To which point in my mind, I'm thinking about the what is it, the lost histories or the missing histories, the Mistborn story about Kelsier that like is clearly a behind the scenes, big picture Cosmere story. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about stuff like that. But then the first story that comes up in that collection of short stories is the Emperor's Soul. So, have you guys read The Emperor's Soul? I should ask that first. No. Oh my goodness. So this is major spoiler territory for you guys even. I don't know if you want me to go forward with this.
Go.
Or, okay. The Emperor's Soul is a story that takes place on Sel, the planet of Elantris, or that Elantris takes place in. And it does not seem to be connected, at least in face value, to the story in Elantris. Like, at least when I go through it, I'm not like, oh, this is that culture and that character. It almost seems like just a different cultural part of the world that we're dealing with. Mm-hmm. Essentially, what the story is about is this emperor there was an assassination attempt on him, and he was effectively killed with a crossbow bolt through the head. The girl who is brought in as kind of the protagonist of the story is this criminal who has the ability to forge. And what she uses that for is to like forge artworks or forge paintings, and like she can make things like just almost perfectly identical. But as you get into the story, you find out that like there's a much deeper level to which that magic can be used to actually completely forge a human being. And she is threatened or kind of put on the spot by her life and everything in order to not save the emperor basically, but to clone the emperor. Where she has to go through this process of learning his life, interviewing anybody she can talk to, finding out everything about him so that she can reprogram and essentially create the emperor again. They have his body. They were able to save and like keep the body from decomposing or whatever, but like she could actually rewrite his mind, like that is as much him as you could possibly think it is. And for all intents and purposes is him, but it's kind of like a clone. Like it's not really him. Mm-hmm. But she has this ability, this magic to do this. And like, as I'm starting to go through this story, that's when this theory, at least to me, kicked up on my mind, that's what Wit is up to. Every single magic that he has been gathering could assist him on this purpose, from light weaving to breaths, which give sentience to inanimate objects and like give that, amazingness to be able to hold the power of everything. Like everything that he could use if he has the ferrochemical abilities from
Mistborn.
From the Mistborn series, like to be able to hold the amount of memory and information that it would take to do that. Anyway, long story short, I think he's not trying to bring Adonasium back together. I think he's trying to clone him. He's trying to recreate Adonasium in order to actually defeat Odium with Adonasium version 2.0. Like
Yeah.
that's what he's up to. And that was a shift in my thinking, because previously I thought he was just trying to gather all those powers so that he could be incredible. He could be Kelsier, you know, like he could just be this, I've got all the powers kind of a character, and he could fight. I don't think he's doing it so that he can fight Odium. I think he's doing it because he intends to use that ability to clone ad nauseam back from all that stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know, like it's maybe it's not totally apparent, but I do think
your audio is really off. I don't know what it is, Brad, but might check your connection with your microphone or something like that.
Okay.
Sounds really off.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
So I don't know if it is maybe totally obvious, but to me it seems clear that Sanderson actually depicts honor, odium, and wit in very similar ways. Like all three of them in the Stormlight archives are busy sort of being storytellers every time they're on screen. You know, like honor is obviously like his whole role with Dalinar is like telling a story through these visions. Odium, every time he pops up, is like telling a story, whether it's to Dalinar or whatever. I mean, actually, maybe only to Dalinar. I don't know that he's popped up to anyone else in Stormlight off the top of my head. And then Wit, everywhere he goes, is sort of telling a story. And that sort of storytelling, I mean, to your point, Rob, about like cloning from the story, like learning everything about, like, it almost seems like all of these people who were present at ad nauseam seem to be trying to work through telling a story, which in some ways is, I guess, a little bit meta when it comes to Sanderson. But I like the theory, because it seems to me that like Wit is busy doing what you're saying he would be doing to kind of clone ad nauseam or whatever. Everywhere he goes, like he is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, in my mind, it was just that he is trying to gain all of the abilities of ad nauseam, because, I mean, essentially that's what you're talking about. When you're talking about all these different things, if you have the ability to use Stormlight and Allomancy and Feruchemy and all the investitures, you're using all the powers of the shards of ad nauseam that have been left behind.
Sort of
and it's like, yeah.
Are you basically saying that Wit is like Captain Planet? Like when our powers combine?
Kind of. But it wasn't.
Is that too dated a reference?
No, I'm with you.
Okay.
With you. If not, that needs to get on Netflix, because that would be my childhood reading if I could go to Captain Planet again.
Like, is Wit, like, you're saying he's Captain Planeting ad nauseam. He's like, our powers are combining, and they're going to make ad nauseam again. Yes.
But see, the difference, at least in my mind, the shift went from like Wit is gathering all of these superpowers to be super powerful. And instead it got really specific on being like, hey, wait a minute. Okay, what is one of these powers? The ability to hold breaths, which give sentience to inanimate objects and give like enlightened power and heightened power of one creature to many, many more. Like you actually have within that story a god king, like a character who like takes on godlike qualities, just on the combination of this, like the breaths of like tens of thousands of regular souls, right? And then you have light weaving, like this amazing, like Shallan is only scratching the surface of what like light weaving is capable of, and it's like crafting of believable illusions, but also like even things that go beyond illusions, like what she's able to do. That all of these powers, I'm just wondering, and I don't even know what all of them are, but I'm just wondering if I got thinking about the White Sands thing. And basically, when you're talking about White Sands, you're talking about, from what I understand, at least reading it, like their power is that they can manipulate the sand, but it requires, like, it takes water of their own in order, like it drains a water source in order to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about, like, I mean, this might not be what it is, but at least on some level, that's like making life out of dust is at least a biblical illusion. like the building blocks of life and of, like, come from, like, just earth, come from dust. And I'm wondering if all of these things come together, not just to make a powerful character out of Wit who holds all of them, but because specifically he has a plan to use all of those together to reforge the soul of Adonasium version 2.0. Yeah.
And to your point, Rob, it is a word of Sanderson that Hoyd was present at the shattering.
Yes. And refused one of the shards. He did not want it. Yeah.
Which is, by the way, there's 16 shards, but Wit refused one. So is that, like, there's a 17th shard that's somewhere?
Or someone, presumably, I don't know, presumably someone else just took it. I would be curious if there's a 17th shard, like an 11th or 12th metal kind of a thing, like that. I don't know. Like, the 17th shard is the name of the group of scholars who believe in non-intervention. And the reason they're hunting Hoyd down is because Hoyd is majorly intervening. Like, he's like a terrorist level threat intervener in other planets. Yeah, that's not at all what you were talking about, I know.
So that kind of, I was just reading this one guy's theory this week that's similar to that. I like yours, because so it's clear that he's collecting all of these investitures, right? That's something that's been kind of established. He's everywhere he goes, he takes on an investiture. And the theory that I came across was that he is collecting these investitures in order to create his own shard that is made up of all of the shards that he's able to use without intent. So, like, intent is that it's the part of the shard that, like, kind of controls the person, you know, like if a person holds honor, the shard of honor, for too long, then they're overtaken by that. So that's kind of the one that I read, and I thought that was interesting. But this idea of him like creating a clone of Adonasium is fascinating.
Yeah.
And
but see that I didn't even remember this part, but earlier, Luke, you were talking about that conversation that Hoyd has with Dalinar about Gibbletish. Yeah. And what was that line you said in there about how, like, if you reassemble Adonasium back, or like, what is it he said? Like, he makes a comment about how, like, if you reassemble the soul of something, is it the same? Like, or is it different?
Yeah.
Like, I went looking for that. I couldn't find it in the book. I was trying to find that conversation. Is it in Way of Kings, right?
It is, yeah.
Where is that conversation?
Let me see. I think it's like chapter 58 or something.
I literally opened my book to it. Page 751.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Or 54.
I wonder if you could do that to a man. This is what he says. I wonder if you could do that to a man. Pull him apart, emotion by emotion, bit by bit, bloody chunk by bloody chunk, then combine them back together into something else, like Odyssean Aenean. If you put a man together like that, Dalinar, be sure to name him Gibberish after me, or perhaps Gibbletish. I just wonder if that's him, in a sense, working out his own thoughts about how, like, is this going to work?
Yeah.
Like, can I take these things and put them back together and make, like, because it's not, like, it couldn't be Adonasium, but it could be, like,
is it something
2.0.
powerful enough
to
defeat Odium? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to think of it more in terms of him wanting to defeat Odium rather than him just wanting to be God.
Yeah. You guys really ought to read, or at least if you can, that Emperor's Soul one, because that to me was like, I mean, it was the question of being like, why is this story in here? I just couldn't place this anything, but here's this story about somebody whose power is the ability to replicate somebody's soul and recreate like the human being through the process of this magic called stamps that they use to forge
Yeah.
a person back together. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that just blows my mind as I've listened to the conversation is just that all of this and more exists within the mind of Brandon Sanderson, that like he has the whole thing there. And this is, you know, perhaps in fantasy circles treading on holy ground, but I'm thinking of, you know, someone like Tolkien, who, you know, had perhaps the biggest mapped out universe with his Middle Earth and all of that, but this feels bigger than that. And so I don't know what his plans are over the next, you know, the rest of his writing career. But I'm now thinking that maybe Stormlight Archives themselves is just one piece of the bigger story that he's going to be building. So I don't know. It would just be fascinating to see how it all maps out. And if you've called it this early, Rob, then I think he has to give you some slice of the royalties or something. That's pretty cool. But I love the theory. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. How should we bring this together to a close here then?
Well,
We kind of went a lot more. I mean, we started maybe with some deep personal like application thoughts, but then just went full geek mode at the end here into theorizing and just kind of being in love with the world that's been created here.
yeah.
But I don't know, as much as that captured my attention this week, I really am resonating with the other idea that you kind of led with, Jonathan, like the thoughts of what does it mean to be you?
Mm-hmm.
Like what, and deal with your own expectations of yourself and other people's expectations. And that was such a heavy thing in this part of the story. And we have the, go ahead.
That connects with what you just said, though. What does it mean to be Adonasium? I think maybe that's what Hoyt is trying to wrestle with. You know, how does that all fit together?
See,
in a sense, he's trying to piece God back together and ask, what does it mean to be God?
Mm.
My theory has always been that he is what's left of God. Like, that he is the remnant of what was shattered and is putting himself back together.
Yeah.
Is it too late in the podcast to share that?
That's going to be cut in the post edit. No,
yeah. Actually, all of your content will be, so it's okay. Just say what you want.
Yeah, it is kind of cool that there was sort of a theme that kind of brought all of these ideas together, and that is identity, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with that, I guess we'll sign off and look forward to the next session where we're going to be finishing up the second half of part 2. So if for any reason you're watching and you're rereading along, because you're probably not here if you haven't read it, then read that.
Yeah. Next. Chapters like what, 20 through the end of part 2.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool.
This was great, guys.
Hey, thanks, Wendell. Thanks, Brightness. Thanks, Gibbletish.
Yeah.
Bright lady, brightness.
Thanks for making me the only unmade amongst us. That's really cool, guys.
It was prophetic for us editing you out. You're still recording. Great.
People I actually have the recording on my device, so yeah.
Yeah.
You did make me the unmade, the taker of secrets. So I mean, careful.
Yeah.
Until next week.
See you next week.
Next time.
Hey guys.